1054, possible code 4. 1427 Cedar Ridge Road. Male, approximately 67 years old. No signs of life. Advise responding units, possible heart attack. Welcome to True Crime Chronicles. The call came in at 8:15 a.m. on a Wednesday. A housekeeper had found the body. No blood, no weapon, no forced entry. Just a man in a leather chair, head tilted back, eyes frozen open. A single coffee cup on the floor, cold. The police assumed it was simple, a heart attack, natural causes, case closed by lunch. They were wrong. What they didn't know, what no one could have known, was that this death was the final act of a conspiracy 23 years in the making. A conspiracy involving two brothers, a stolen inheritance, and a killer who had already been to the funeral and served the widow tea. This is the story of the case that looked simple until investigators looked closer. I'm your host. This is True Crime Chronicles. The case that looked simple until investigators looked closer. 1427 Cedar Ridge Road, a sprawling six-bedroom estate in an affluent suburb, the home of Richard Sutton, 67, retired surgeon and community pillar. Every year he funded 2 medical scholarships. He had no known enemies, he had no criminal record, he had no reason to die. The housekeeper, Elena Vasquez, entered the study at 8:15 a.m. She found Richard Sutton slumped in his favorite leather chair. A ceramic coffee cup lay on its side near his right foot. The liquid had soaked into the Persian rug. He was not breathing. I called his name 3 times. He did not move. His eyes were open. I touched his hand. It was cold. I ran to the kitchen and called 911. Detective Marcus Webb arrived at 9 a.m., 26 years on the force. He had worked narcotics, homicides, and 2 serial murder cases. But this one, he later said, felt wrong from the first breath. The room was warm, too warm. The fireplace had been lit recently, but it was August. Who lights a fire in August? And the coffee cup, it was on the floor, but the saucer was still on the desk. Neat. Almost like someone placed the cup gently. You don't drop a cup gently. The initial report was filed at 11:30 a.m. Cause of death, pending autopsy, presumed heart attack. No signs of struggle, no weapon, no note. The widow, Margaret Sutton, was upstairs asleep. She told police she had taken a sleeping pill and heard nothing. The scene was clean, too clean. Detective Webb. I told my sergeant this is not a heart attack. He said, Webb, the man was 67, overweight, and had a family history of cardiac disease. Let it go. But I couldn't. The fire, the cup, the way his hands were folded in his lap, like someone posed him after he died. The autopsy was performed the following morning by Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, a forensic pathologist with 30 years of experience. She found no signs of blunt force trauma, no needle marks, no internal bleeding, but something caught her attention. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo. The coronary arteries were clean. No blockages, the heart muscle was healthy. This was not a heart attack. I ordered a full toxicology screen. It would take 10 days, but I told Detective Webb, start looking at the people closest to him. This man was killed. 10 days later, the toxicology report arrived. Richard Sutton's blood contained a lethal concentration of Digoxin, a heart medication used to treat atrial fibrillation. The problem, Richard Sutton did not have atrial fibrillation. He had never been prescribed Digoxin. The drug had been administered to him without his knowledge. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo. Digoxin toxicity causes nausea, confusion, and then cardiac arrest. The symptoms mimic a heart attack perfectly. If I had not run the tox screen, this would have been ruled natural causes. Someone counted on that. Detective Webb reopened the case that same afternoon. The simple heart attack was now a homicide, and the killer was someone with access to prescription drugs, access to the house, and a reason to want Richard Sutton dead. Detective Webb interviewed the inner circle: the widow, Margaret Sutton; the son, Andrew Sutton; the daughter, Laura Sutton; the brother, Harold Sutton; and the housekeeper, Elena Vasquez. Every single one of them had something to hide. Margaret Sutton, 64, had been married to Richard for 41 years. She was composed, elegant. She wore black and spoke in a whisper. "My husband was a good man. He gave to charity. He loved his children, but he was also stubborn. He had recently changed his will. He told me he was leaving most of the estate to the hospital. Andrew was furious. Laura stopped speaking to him. Harold threatened to sue. It was chaos." "And you, Mrs. Sutton? How did you feel about the new will?" "I was disappointed, but I would never hurt him. I loved him." Andrew Sutton, 38, was a former stockbroker who had been fired for embezzlement. He owed nearly $400,000 in gambling debts. His father had cut him out of the will completely. "I didn't kill my father. I was at a casino that night, 300 miles away. Check the receipts, check the cameras. I have an alibi." The alibi held. Andrew Sutton was on video at a blackjack table from 9 p.m. until 3 a.m. He could not have administered the Digoxin. Laura Sutton, 35, was a pharmacist. She had access to Digoxin, she had access to syringes, and she had a motive. Her father had recently discovered that she had been stealing prescription opioids from the hospital where she worked. He had threatened to report her to the medical board. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I didn't kill him. He was my father. I loved him." Laura's alibi was weaker. She had been home alone that night. No witnesses, no phone calls, no security footage. But there was no direct evidence linking her to the Digoxin. Not yet. Harold Sutton, 69, was Richard's older brother. They had been locked in a bitter legal battle over their parents' estate for 15 years. Harold had lost. He had been ordered to pay Richard nearly $2 million. He never paid. "Richard was a thief. He stole our parents' house from me. He stole my inheritance. Am I sorry he's dead? No, but I didn't kill him. I'm too old for that." Harold had no alibi. He lived alone. He had a criminal record for fraud, and he had recently purchased a digital scale capable of measuring milligrams, the kind used to measure Digoxin doses. But a scale is not a confession. The case stalled. 4 suspects, 4 motives, no weapon, no witness, no confession. 8 months passed. The case went cold. Detective Webb was reassigned to a different precinct, but he worked nights and weekends alone in his basement, surrounded by boxes of evidence. And then he found something no one had noticed: the coffee cup. Detective Webb. The cup was tested for fingerprints. They found Richard's, Margaret's, the housekeeper's, and one partial. But that partial was never run through the national database. Why? Because the case was ruled a heart attack. That partial sat in an evidence locker for 8 months. Webb personally submitted the partial print. The result came back 72 hours later. Match found. The print belonged to a man named Dennis Royce, age 52, last known address, a halfway house in a neighboring state. Dennis Royce was a convicted felon. He had served 12 years for attempted murder. He had no connection to the Sutton family. He had never been inside the house. Or so they thought. Detective Webb. I ran Dennis Royce through every database I had, and I found a connection. 23 years ago, Dennis Royce was the cellmate of Harold Sutton. Harold served 18 months for fraud in the same prison. They were released the same year. Harold Sutton had hired Dennis Royce to kill his brother. The payment, $50,000 and a stolen car. Royce had entered the house through an unlocked back door while Margaret slept. He had injected Richard with Digoxin while Richard sat in his chair watching television. Then he had staged the scene, the fireplace, the coffee cup, the folded hands, to look like a natural death. But Royce made one mistake. He touched the coffee cup without gloves. Dennis Royce was arrested at a motel on the outskirts of the city. He did not resist. He did not ask for a lawyer. He confessed within 20 minutes. Dennis Royce. Harold paid me $50,000, half up front, half after. He gave me the Digoxin. He told me where the spare key was. He said Richard would be alone that night. He was wrong about that. The wife was upstairs, but she didn't wake up. Detective Webb. Why did you do it? I needed the money. And Harold was convincing. He said Richard ruined his life. He said Richard stole from him. I don't know if that's true. I didn't ask. I just did the job. Royce's confession was recorded. It lasted 93 minutes. In it, he described the injection, the staging, and the moment Richard Sutton took his last breath. He showed no emotion. He spoke like a man describing a recipe. Harold Sutton was arrested the same day. He did not confess. He hired a lawyer. He pleaded not guilty. But the evidence was overwhelming. Phone records between Harold and Royce, a cash withdrawal of $25,000 3 days before the murder, and the digital scale, which still had dioxin residue on it. The trial of Harold Sutton for the murder of his brother Richard began 14 months after the death. The prosecution presented 15 days of evidence: the fingerprint, the confession, the phone records, the cash withdrawal, the scale, and the testimony of Dennis Royce, who had taken a plea deal for a reduced sentence. The defense argued that Dennis Royce was a liar and a manipulator who had acted alone. They claimed Harold had no knowledge of the murder. They pointed to the lack of DNA in Harold's home. They called Harold's elderly neighbor to testify that Harold was home the night of the murder. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. Jury foreperson. On the charge of murder in the first degree of Richard Sutton, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Harold Sutton showed no emotion. He stood. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at his sister-in-law, Margaret, who was crying in the front row. Then he looked at Detective Webb. He nodded once. Then he sat down. Judge. Mr. Sutton, you orchestrated the murder of your own brother for money. You exploited a vulnerable man with a criminal history to do your bidding. You then attended the funeral and accepted condolences from the very family you destroyed. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. May God have mercy on your soul. Harold Sutton is currently incarcerated at a maximum security prison. He has filed 2 appeals. Both have been denied. Dennis Royce is serving 25 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2042. Margaret Sutton sold the house at 1427 Cedar Ridge Road 6 months after the trial. She moved to a small apartment in another state. She does not speak to her children. She does not attend family gatherings. She told a reporter once, "That house was a tomb long before Richard died." Andrew Sutton filed for bankruptcy. He now works at a car wash. He is not allowed to see his own children without supervision. Laura Sutton lost her pharmacy license. She completed a rehab program and now works as a cashier at a grocery store. She told a documentary filmmaker, "I didn't kill my father, but I was so angry at him that I didn't visit him for 2 years before he died. That guilt is worse than any prison sentence." Elena Vasquez, the housekeeper who found the body, moved back to her home country. She does not speak about that morning. Her family says she has nightmares. The case that looked simple until investigators looked closer is now closed. Not because every question was answered, but because every answer led to the same truth. Greed is a poison that does not need a syringe. Richard Sutton was a flawed man. He was stubborn. He was controlling. He made enemies of his own family. But he did not deserve to die alone in a chair injected by a stranger hired by his own brother. Harold Sutton will die in prison. Dennis Royce will grow old behind bars. The money, the inheritance, the estate, the $2 million is now held in a trust for a children's hospital. Richard's last will was honored. This is the part of the story where some podcasts would say, the case remains open, or new evidence may still emerge, but not here, not on True Crime Chronicles.
Here, we tell the whole story, from the first 911 call to the last gavel, from the coffee cup on the floor to the fingerprint that broke the case open. And when the story's over, we close the file. Richard Sutton's grave is visited every year on his birthday, not by his brother, not by his son, but by Detective Marcus Webb. He leaves a single white rose. He does not speak, he stands for a moment, and then he walks away. Because some cases, no matter how simple they look, never really leave you. You have been listening to True Crime Chronicles. This was the case that looked simple until investigators looked closer. No sequel, no continuation, no unanswered thread, just a story, a closed file, and the quiet certainty that justice, however late, is still justice. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, and remember, the simplest cases are always worth a second look.